And our fifth class of lipids will be the steroids. They're a little bit different, but again, their name will tell us which structures we find on them.
How do you recognize the steroids? Well, the easiest way to recognize them is that they will have one common structural feature, and that is something called the steroid nucleus. And the steroid nucleus looks like a six-membered ring fused to another six-membered ring side by side, and then it goes up into the next corner and it's fused to another six-membered ring, and finally at the end we'll have a fused five-membered ring. This is how I remember it then. A six-membered ring, another six-membered ring, up for six, and at the end, 5. You'll hear me say 6, 6, up for 6, 5, as we're going through the next portion. So some common examples of steroids are cholesterol, cortisone, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. See if you can spot the steroid nucleus in each of these. Some of them may look a little bit different, so they may have double bonds in them, but they still have the overall shape of the steroid nucleus. In cholesterol, here we see our 6, 6, up for 6, and 5 structure. In cortisone, we see our 6, 6, up for 6, and 5 structure. And then on testosterone, we see a 6, 6, up for 6, 5 for our steroid nucleus. Estrone looks a little bit different, but still we see a 6-carbon ring, another 6, up for 6, and 5 at the end. And for progesterone again, a 6, 6, up for 6, 5-membered ring, indicating that this is a steroid. So that the two things that we know for sure about these lipids are they are insoluble in water, and that tells us that they're found mostly in the cell membrane, again, avoiding the water as much as possible, and that they have this basic structure known as the steroid nucleus. There are 3 groupings of steroids that are used in the human body in various ways. Cholesterol has its own purposes. We have reproductive steroids, and then we have corticosteroids. All of these steroids are lipids, and that means that they're found in the membranes. They tend to be stored up in membranes. And now we'll look at each of them individually to see how they behave in the body. So let's look at cholesterol and cholesterol-like groups. Cholesterol is found in the membranes of most animal cells. So we do find it just about everywhere, but again, it's found only in animals. As you know, the membrane is called a fluid mosaic, and the fluid part of it is often controlled by the cholesterol that's present. If there's, without cholesterol, when the membrane gets cold, it starts to harden up because those lines, the fatty acid lines, start to line up and it starts to harden very nicely. But when cholesterol is present, it stops it from being able to line up, and we end up seeing that the fluidity of the membrane stays more like a liquid because it doesn't freeze even at lower temperatures when the cholesterol is present. At higher temperatures, we see that cholesterol also maintains the fluidity of the membrane because it stays in the solid state because of its high melting point. The fact that it is a solid even in the temperatures within our body is one of the causes of the problems that we see with cholesterol. And those 2 problems are based upon arteriosclerosis, which we know as the hardening of arteries. What we mean by hardening is that it starts to turn into a solid. So it's not flexible anymore, which explains the term hardening. But what's really going to happen is it's going to start to clog the arteries. The 2 major diseases we look at are stroke and heart disease. So, can you get rid of all of the cholesterol in your body? No, we actually need to have that cholesterol so that we can have many, many of our steroidal hormones in the body. On the other hand, can you have too much cholesterol? Yes, of course. Most people know that we're always trying to watch our cholesterol amounts, and that we do have 2 sources of cholesterol. Some is that the body makes cholesterol on its own, and some is that we eat too much, especially if we eat meats and animal products, because that is where we find cholesterol. It is not found in plants. So can somebody who's vegan have high cholesterol? Well, yes, they can, and that's only because some people are born with high cholesterol. It's a part of their genetics. So some people automatically have very high cholesterol, even if they don't eat very much meat. And what is the problem with high cholesterol? Well, essentially we have two things. Number one, it tends to indicate that you may get gallstones because gallstones are usually around 90% made up of cholesterol. So there's high percentages of cholesterol in most gallstones. But more importantly, we look at cholesterol as an indicator of your probability of having a heart attack. High cholesterol usually indicates that you're eating a lot of meats, and so therefore you probably are having a higher fat diet. Also, cholesterol tends to be a solid at room temperature and at body temperature, and so we tend to see that it collects in the arteries and starts to clog the arteries. This makes a great point for the other lipids to start collecting. And eventually, as it starts to clog off the artery with all that solid, sort of like when you see the river or your gutter out front, you might see that the water's running and then this little plant on the side starts to get caught in a little, maybe a little rut or something like that. Little plant gets caught, a stem, something like that, and then everything starts to build up in that spot. And that's what we see with our arteries. There's this little spot where some of the cholesterol starts to collect because it's a solid and there's enough of it, and it'll start to collect. It grows and grows, and then finally that plaque more or less blocks it off so that there's no flow of blood anymore. When the blood no longer comes back to the heart, we call that a heart attack, or if we stop the blood flow to the brain, we call that a stroke. So as you can see, this is a major, major issue. One of the well-known purposes of steroids is as reproductive hormones. The three that we're going to talk about now are progesterone, testosterone, and estrone. So progesterone is the most important hormone associated with pregnancy. It is also the precursor to both testosterone and estrone. Hopefully you can see the similarity between progesterone and testosterone, where you can see that the methyl groups are placed in essentially the same spot. The ketone, the double bond are all in the same area. And then over here we have one major difference, which is where we have the OH on the testosterone, and we have this ketone group on the progesterone. When we look at the comparison between progesterone and estrone, again we see a very similar structure with the methyl group in the similar area and the oxygen on the same spot of the benzene ring as the similar ketone is on the progesterone. And so we can see the similarities between these structures. So what is the source of progesterone? Well, several steps back, the original source of progesterone was cholesterol. And hopefully you can see the relationship between the progesterone and the cholesterol that we see here, where most of the structure is the same. Again, we all have the steroid nucleus. We have the oxygen in the same position. We have the two methyl groups in the same position. But the major difference is that on the cholesterol, we have this alkane side structure, and we see on the progesterone, there's a ketone. And so that changes the polarity, which changes the way it behaves in the blood. So most people know that testosterone is considered the male hormone, and estrogen or estrone or progesterone are considered the female hormones. But are they actually only male and only female? Well, it ends up that in our body we all have all of them, and the difference is just how much you have. So men tend to have more testosterone, and so they build muscle faster because testosterone is an anabolic steroid, which means it's a muscle building hormone, and estrogen is found a lot more in higher concentrations in women. But again, we all have all of them. Just the amount of each will give us some idea of whether you have more male characteristics or more female characteristics. I actually like to focus on how close and similar these two things are. So if you look at testosterone and estrogen, what you'll find is that they have an oxygen in the same spots, but in one case where you have an alcohol, it's a ketone, and in the other side where you have a ketone, it becomes an alcohol. And the last subset of steroids that we're going to discuss in this class are the corticosteroids. Two of the common ones are cortisone and cortisol,
And from their names, you may recognize that one of them is a ketone and the other one is an alcohol. So these two are very similar things, and both of them are used in a lot of regulation of biochemical processes, like carbohydrate metabolism. But where you've most likely heard of the corticosteroids is as an anti-inflammatory for a variety of different diseases. So we'll see that in some arthritis cases, the swelling will go down with cortisone treatment. Asthma is used as a corticosteroid that's breathed in to calm the lungs. We'll see it on many skin conditions like eczema, psoriasis. Again, all used as an anti-inflammatory. Because these are not performance-enhancing drugs, which means that they don't enlarge your muscles rapidly, so they're not anabolic steroids. These corticosteroids can be used by athletes to reduce swelling when they have some kind of injury.
So what do you need to know about the steroids? Number one, you need to know that it is a lipid. And number two,
because it is a lipid, we will expect it to be found in the cell membranes. And finally, number three,
to be able to identify the structure. Again, you're going to need that pattern where you have a six-membered ring fused to a six-membered ring, up for six, and then at the end is a five-membered ring, which I call a house.